Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, he called an election during a pandemic. And then on the campaign trail, the Premier promised British Columbians they would receive their recovery benefit money in the mail by Christmas. So British Columbians took this Premier at his word. They made plans to pay their bills and budgeted for the holidays, expecting to see the money. But on Wednesday, many British Columbians found out that eligibility for this benefit is based on pre-pandemic 2019 tax returns, even though pre-pandemic income isn't an indication of a family's current need. So to the Premier, what does he have to say to those families in British Columbia that are struggling after having lost a job, having lost their income, who are afraid for their families, and now they've discovered that they may not be eligible for a single dime of the recovery benefit money?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with the Leader of the Opposition. It's been a very difficult year for British Columbians. It's been a very difficult year for Canadians and for everyone around the world as a result of this pandemic. And we know that people have been hit hard. It is, Honourable Speaker, why we brought forward a workers' benefit back in the spring. It is why we put together a Stronger BC plan in September. And it is why we brought forward this recovery benefit to help 3.7 million British Columbians. These are the ones that have been hardest hit. These are the ones that we are committed to continue to support, and I know that the members opposite as well feel committed to support those folks. And this benefit is going to help 3.7 million British Columbians.
Leader of the Official Opposition on first supplemental.
Well, thank you very much. And to the Finance Minister, British Columbians woke up on Wednesday after the announcement, many of them realizing that the very direct support that was promised by this Premier during an election campaign, that they may not be eligible because it is based on pre-pandemic circumstances. So the Finance Minister knows full well that many families won't be able to make ends meet this holiday season. And everyone in the House is concerned about that. So what did the Finance Minister say that British Columbians would do with their benefit money? I quote, getting, their $5 latte because they haven't been able to, end quote. Hundreds of thousands of British Columbians have lost income since the onset of the pandemic, not 2019. They have lost income. Many of them don't know how they're going to make their rent payment or how they're going to feed their families. And this minister references a $5 latte, hardly on the minds of many British Columbians. So again, to the Premier, what does the Premier have to say about the people who were counting on the money that he promised them during an election campaign?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's so interesting to hear the member opposite cherry pick, because what I said was it's an opportunity for people to pay their bills, to help buy clothes for their kids, help pay for groceries, buy Christmas presents, and perhaps even, yes, treat themselves to a latte if they haven't been able to do that. So I think it's really important, Honourable Speaker, to speak to the whole context. And I know that the members opposite are hearing from British Columbians about how hard it's been, because we're hearing that too. And we're responding with a recovery benefit that 90% of adults in British Columbia we know are eligible for. And of that, Honourable Speaker, 85% of those 90% are eligible for the full benefit. And that's going to make a significant difference for right now. People need help now, not necessarily in the future. We have a vaccine on the horizon, which I know certainly helped me sort of get through the day yesterday. It's been really hard on British Columbians. And we're going to continue to be there for British Columbia and for everybody here in this province, not just those at the top, Honourable Speaker, but for every British Columbian, because this has been a very, very, very difficult time for so many. We're going to keep doing what we need to do to help British Columbians get through this.
Member of Peace River North.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker. Let's be clear. That's fine. Let's be clear, and to the Minister. What happened to 100%? The Premier made a promise, $1,000 in everyone's account by Christmas. And it looks like he's going to break that promise. Many British Columbia families are expecting this money. They're expecting help from this government and the support before this holiday season. And why? Because the Premier made a promise up on the fly, and I think that's why this is not going to happen. He's just making it up as he goes. A lot of families are going to notice, though. A lot of families are struggling, a lot of families are hurting, and a lot of families are looking for help from this government to fulfill a promise they made. So can the Premier tell British Columbians who are counting on this money, will everyone still be getting the $1,000 that he promised?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We promised to deliver a recovery benefit to those who needed it most. And the numbers show that people with high incomes, people who perhaps can buy yachts, were far less impacted than those with middle and lower income earners. We know that those are the people who are most impacted. And our focus is on those who need it most, those who need help to pay their rent, which is why, Honourable Speaker, we were one of the few provinces that provided a rent supplement to helping folks. That is, Honourable Speaker, why we helped those folks. We knew that the people needed help, and so we created programs throughout these 9 months to make sure that people could pay for groceries, to make sure that they could pay their rent, to make sure that they could buy their children new running shoes that they outgrew. And we're going to keep doing that for the people who need it most in this province, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Peace River South on supplemental.
Well, the promise keeps changing day by day, it seems. The Premier said everybody would have $1,000 in their account, direct deposit, I believe was his exact quote, by Christmas. It's clear this government does not actually understand what's happening on the ground. When the minister seems to highlight a $5 latte as being something that people are excited about getting if they get this money, Look, some people are just trying to survive. In my riding, I know many people that were lucky enough to be working in 2019 who lost their job this year because of COVID, and now under these new rules are going to get zero. How is that fair? How is that actually helping people right now that are in need? They're trying to decide whether they can afford to pay their bills or buy a Christmas present for their child this year. This is completely wrong. There's only 15 days left now until Christmas, which means 15 days left for this government and this Premier to come good on his election promise. So again, to the Premier, what does he tell the men and the women here in the province who believed him and hoped that they would be getting support this Christmas for themselves and their families?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Well, I'm very proud that applications will open on December 18th, Honourable Speaker, and I think we all need to express a little bit of gratitude and appreciation to the public service that have been working diligently to develop this application process so that it is quick, that it is efficient, and that people can start getting the supports that they need into their bank accounts ASAP, Honourable Speaker. We're going to start seeing that roll out December 18th. Within a couple of days, people will see money in their bank accounts, and that's going to make a difference right now for people. Not 6 months from now, like the members opposite would perhaps suggest, but right now people are going to start to get the relief that they need because we've been responsive and we're delivering.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Southern Gulf Islands, Salt Spring Island, and Juan de Fuca communities are rural. But because they are electoral areas within the Capital Regional District, they're deemed urban. The urban designation limits these communities from applying for important grants for rural communities outside the CRD. For years, electoral area directors Dave Howe, Gary Holman, and Mike Hicks have advocated for change. They could only be deemed rural, though, they were told, if they were included within the Island Coastal Economic Trust, or ICT. There has been an enormous amount of advocacy for change that should have been done long ago. The province has consulted with ICT for more than 3.5 years. Wouldn't you know it? On Sunday, September the 20th, on the eve of the snap election call, the BC NDP issued Order in Council 533 to pass a designation change for the iced tea. However, the NDP made only a change to the Premier's riding. Wanda Fuca was added while the Gulf Islands were left out. My question through you, Honourable Speaker, is to the Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation. Has the Minister issued the second half of that pre-election order to change the urban designation of the Gulf Island communities in my riding?
Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation.
Yeah, thank you, Minister, and I want to thank the member for the question. My first question in the legislature, I appreciate him asking, and I also appreciate his letter that came to me, I think 30 minutes after I was sworn in as the minister for this file. And so what I can commit to the member is that I'm happy to continue this conversation with him after this chamber rises today. It's certainly something that we're reviewing right now. I've asked staff to get me a full briefing on that, and it's scheduled for next week. Thank you.
Member for Saanich Northern Islands.
So this is, I appreciate the invitation to have another conversation. The reality is, for the Southern Gulf Island communities and for Salt Spring Island, that they have been conversing about this with this government. I've been conversing with this government, with successive ministers in that ministry for the last 3.5 years. The advocacy has been going on, Mr. Speaker, for more than 7 years. The idea that these communities in the Southern Gulf Islands are anything but rural, and I know many members across the way know very well how rural these communities are, to think that we would have to be continuing a conversation about whether or not these communities are rural is absurd. The reality is that without this designation change, these communities do not get access to grants that they rightly deserve. For example, for COVID recovery, these communities are tourism-based communities that have been hit so hard by COVID, they are in and having an existential crisis right now, this moment. So we can continue to converse about this, or we can just do the order that needs to be done that was done easily. In fact, what's really crazy about this, Mr. Speaker, is that there was an act. There were words on paper. All they did was exclude the communities from my riding. This is excluding them from being able to apply for broadband access, which is going to help diversify their economy. This is likely going to exclude them from applying for money that this government announced earlier this week for mental health and addictions treatment. We're done having a conversation in the Southern Gulf Islands, Mr. Speaker. We need action. My preference is that the minister put through the order to complement the Premier's advantage that his community's got. My question is to the minister, when is he going to do it?
Minister.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you to the member. And as I said, I'm happy to have our first conversation, not a continued conversation. And what I would say to the member, and he raises concerns around tourism, and I know that many people in the tourism industry have been greatly impacted by the challenges of the pandemic. And you know, we have made $19.4 million available for tourism-dependent communities. I'm sure we can talk to the member also about some of these communities, how they can have access to that funding. But again, to the issue that he raises, as I committed to him in the previous question, I'm certainly happy to meet with him. I look forward to my briefing with my new Deputy Minister as well, and we'll get back to him shortly.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last March, $1.5 billion in economic recovery supports for business was unanimously approved by this legislature. The government then wasted 6 months of time before announcing $300 million in funding for the small and medium-sized business recovery grant a week before the recent snap election. And disappointingly, this government's only grant program for small businesses is a red tape disaster. Among 18 eligibility requirements, businesses must be currently operating, have been in operation for at least 3 years, had a revenue loss of 70% during March and April of 2020, and revenue losses of at least 50% every month since. So my question to the Premier is this: how many small business applications have actually been approved, and how many small businesses have actually received funding from this program to date?
Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. And no doubt small businesses are hurting throughout the province. Some are doing well, but many are not. And I've had the opportunity to talk to many small business owners over the last 2 weeks. In fact, even before that in my community. And so one of the things that I think particularly proud of is we have one of the most comprehensive plans in all of Canada when it comes to supporting small businesses throughout this province. The member will know that we brought in tax credits for small businesses that were wanting to hire either new employees or also bring back employees. The member will also know that we brought in 25% property tax cuts. And so when it comes to this, we've got 1,400 businesses that are currently that are in the process. But it's important for the member to know this. The process was set up in a two-part process. First, it was to ensure, and we provided dollars to small businesses so that they can get a proper consultant to come in and give them advice on how they can become viable after COVID is passed. Also, for them to provide them up to $30,000 and up to $40,000 if they're a tourism operator. And so it is my hope that we will see many, many more small businesses apply. Recently had a call with tourism operators, folks from Able BC, Restaurant Association. They wrote a letter to my office. We discussed how we can make this program more accessible to small businesses throughout this province. It was a very fruitful conversation. I appreciate the Minister of Tourism and Arts and Culture for being at that meeting and being a strong advocate. And I look forward to that dialogue that continues.
Thank you. Member.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, $1.5 billion of funding approved on March 23rd of this year. The government sits on its duff until 6 months later before they finally announce a $300 million small and medium-sized recovery grant program specifically focused on small businesses, 1 week before an election campaign. We then get into a snap election campaign and another 2 months of time is wasted. And now we're sitting here just before Christmas and he has the audacity to stand up and suggest that 1,400 businesses which have applied for funding, that's good enough. These are businesses in every community around this province that are barely getting by. They're not sure that they're going to make it to the other side of Christmas, to the minister. Honourable Speaker, one thing that the minister could do is he could call the bill that we tabled in the House here today, which has been called by restaurants across the province as a critical lifeline to cap delivery charges. We've suggested a recovery grant with a really simplified application process. We've suggested that the government return excess WorkSafe BC funding to small businesses. We've suggested that the government help with PPE costs. In fact, we've suggested dozens of actions over the last 8 months, and this government has failed to act. Mr. Speaker, not only has the government not taken any of our ideas, the government has also taken all this time and has failed to figure out how to push these dollars out the door for small businesses in this particular granting question. So my follow-up question to the Premier is this. Small businesses across BC are hanging by a thread. They're unsure of whether they're going to be in business only months from now. We're talking about tens of thousands of mom-and-pop shops, little boutiques, restaurants, and other shops in communities all over the province. Will the Premier throw small businesses a lifeline? Will he finally step up and provide funding supports that are so desperately needed to ensure that these small businesses are still here in our communities only months from now?
Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and clearly somebody who's running for leadership over there. Thank you for that speech. We understand on this side of the house how businesses are impacted. My family ran a small restaurant here in Victoria for over close to a decade, and it was a difficult time then. And imagine the challenge that the businesses are facing right now. And I appreciate the member now claims to want to run and lead the Free Enterprise Coalition, and they propose bills that affect the marketplace. We have agreed, we have committed on this side of the House to bring that legislation in. We will be doing consultation on that. I know the Minister, the Solicitor General on
Members, order, please. Members, come to order.
It didn't take long.
Minister.
It didn't take long, Mr.
Minister,
Speaker.
hold it. Okay, Minister will continue.
I guess I hit a soft spot there, Mr. Speaker. It didn't take long for them to return to the ways that they normally are in this House. But I will say this, Honourable Speaker, we know small businesses are greatly impacted.
Members, let's hear the answer, please.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Minister.
We know that small businesses are impacted, Honourable Speaker, and let me be clear to the members of the House. Our goal is to ensure as many small businesses get access to the grants as possible, but we want to do it in a way that we can make sure that there's public accountability in that measure. And so the conversation we had with tourism operators, members of ABLE BC, and many other stakeholders last week was about how we can find that, how we can find a way for more of their members to get access to these grants. Honourable Speaker, it was clear on that call that they were grateful for all the supports the province has already brought in place, and they wanted to find ways to get more of their members get access to those grants, and I look forward to continuing that work.
Thank you, ma'am. Minister. Member for Richmond North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The one sector that has been hardest hit by COVID-19 has been the tourism industry. And the government has consistently only offered promises without actually delivering support. The industry back in the summer was asking for $680 million in aid, and Premier ignored that request. Now the Premier has another report. To the Premier, will he not just accept the recommendations, but actually implement them immediately?
Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Richmond North Centre for the question. There is no doubt that the tourism sector has been hit hard by COVID, and that all of our constituencies, to remind everyone in this chamber, because we started just a few days ago, through the throne speech, all 87 of our ridings are being crushed by COVID. Everyone is going day by day to get through the good news that we heard from Dr. Bonnie Henry about the vaccine coming to our neighborhoods and close to home. So when the member asks the question, have they been hit? Yes, they've been hit. With an accusation that the report, that it's just another report. I received the report yesterday. The member is referring to the future of travel, positioning BC to accelerate recovery and growth. It's a task force that the government put together. They've met 11 times. They met in September. The member opposite, I appreciate the member opposite for heckling. This isn't a time to heckle. I take this issue seriously. There's 7 recommendations in here. I got the report yesterday, and as Minister, I'm going to get to work to take action on the recommendations. They want dedicated funding for tourism. We are going to move quickly, but they're not decisions that I make alone. They're decisions that I make with finance. They're decisions that I make with Minister for Jobs, Economic Development and Recovery. They're decisions that we make with the Minister for Indigenous Relations. There's a call to action for funding dedicated to Indigenous tourism. So I hope the members aren't laughing about that. I take this issue seriously. We're going to move to work on an action plan. And if that means, as the member opposite from Kamloops was talking about, if we need to make amendments to the small and medium businesses recovery grant to make it more accessible, we'll do so. Fully committed to taking action on moving forward so that all of our communities have the support that they need. But I just want to close by saying this isn't the time. The members opposite talk about partisanship. This is a very, very difficult time for everyone, and let's not forget that we're in the middle of a global pandemic.
Members will come to order. We are wasting very precious time in the question period, members. Member for Richmond North Centre, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for the information of the newly appointed tourism minister, that the tourism industry actually started talking to this government way back in summer, in July, is because of the SLAP election that the Premier called for his self-serving agenda, that's why that requests have been put on hold. So I hope that the minister will study the file and get up to speed. The tourism sector is being decimated, and the Premier pats himself on the back. It took more than 10 months to get this report. The second wave is ripping the industry, and we have a government that wants to take another 4 months off the job. We are talking about small family-owned businesses in every corner of the province. They don't have 4 months to wait. Again, to the Premier, will he provide immediate support to the men and women working in the tourism sector who now face ruin?
Minister of Tourism, Arts, Culture and Sports.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and again, I'd like to thank the member for her advocacy. It is her job as the official opposition to advocate, and we will work together. This is not a report that's going to sit on its shelf. The deadline was December 31st. I received it on December 9th, which was yesterday, and I am committed to moving forward on the actions. To make it political about whether I care as an MLA as well, about my small business operators and the tourism operators. I know that I'm a member of Cabinet, but we're all MLAs who have constituencies with tourism, small business operators that are very deeply worried about keeping the lights on. And they're worried about keeping their employees on the payroll. And to suggest that I don't care about that is just, it's so irresponsible. It's 10 months that we've been in the middle of a global pandemic. The member opposite threw out a whole bunch of numbers, 4 months here, 10 months there. It's been 10 months that the public service has been working around the clock. The members opposite can heckle all they want, but I'm acknowledging that the public service has been working around the clock for 10 months. We rolled out money for destination development so that some of those small business operators can keep the lights on. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Carrick-Chilcotin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the unintended consequences of the pandemic regulations has been the capacity reduction of local shelters across British Columbia. In Williams Lake, that leaves 10 people with no place to lay their heads at night. I think of Amber, who has no choice but to live outside in temperatures that are plunging to -20 and lower. Winter isn't coming to the Caribou or the Kootenays. Trust me, Mr. Speaker, it's here already. As a community, we're looking for support from the province so that these people know that they're not alone. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier. What plans does he have to make sure that Amber and many like her don't have to spend the night outdoors due to these pandemic regulations?
Attorney General.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question about such a vitally important issue, namely the people, the men, the women who are living outside in our province. It's an inexcusable situation, and it's unfortunately due to a long time underinvestment in affordable and supportive housing in our province. Fortunately, we are turning that corner. We're investing literally billions of dollars in housing. We're housing thousands of people with modular housing that can be built very quickly. And one of the things that I can commit to the member is, if he's interested, is a briefing directly from BC Housing, not spin, directly from BC Housing for him about the work that BC Housing is doing in his community and for people like his constituent that he told us about. I want to recognize the impact that COVID has had on the availability of shelters because of social distancing requirements. It's meant that BC Housing has had to work extra hard to identify cold, wet weather shelter beds in many different communities. And one of the areas where they need support, where government would welcome support, is in working with local government to identify spaces. And this is an area where all MLAs can provide support if they're interested and able to do so, in working with local governments. So thank you to the member for the question very much. This is a very serious human rights issue on Human Rights Day, and I'm grateful to him for raising it.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the week that has happened down in Victoria here and the days leading up to this session. We have a government that has cut funds for families with children and youth with special needs. We have a government and a premier who has cut the funding for people with disability payments in half under the guise of saying it's not really a cut, when we know that if they were qualified for the $500 benefit and got their $300 a month over those 3 months, it would be $1,400. Instead, they will qualify for $950. That's a $450 cut, any way you slice it, for people with disabilities from this premier. And today, nothing but platitudes about people in shelter spaces that are over capacity. Should have been well known leading into the colder seasons that this was going to happen, with no plan in place for tourism yet, no plans, period. And yet we stand here today being called back to this legislature, Mr. Speaker, with the only piece of legislation this government wants to talk about is how to delay doing the work of the budget for 2 extra months until May, which means no more supports for people until May of this coming year. So again, to the Premier, what is his plan to restore all of these cuts to our most vulnerable populations in British Columbia immediately, to make sure people have the supports across the board that have been taken away over this last week and a half by this government?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and it's my pleasure to rise and respond and answer a question about a government that is more committed to ensuring that people get the resources and the supports that they need than ever occurred during the 16 years that they sat on this side of the House. Since the start of the pandemic, this government has worked day and night with the public service to ensure that supports are in place, to ensure that not only have rates been increased for those on social assistance, which never happened when that side was sitting over here and it was frozen on the speaker, to ensure the largest affordable housing program in the history of this province was undertaken, Honourable Speaker, to ensure right across this community that people are getting the housing and the supports that they need. That's what's been taking place. That's why this government is taking action. And $1,000, Honourable Speaker, and $500 for single people. And the public knows, Honourable Speaker, that that money will be coming. The Premier has indicated it. It is a commitment that is being followed through by this government, Honourable Speaker. And there will be more good news in the weeks and months ahead to ensure that British Columbians, as families, as individuals, get through this pandemic together, because this province has got its act together and that opposition doesn't. That's why they're over there and we're over here.
Bell ends question period.